My name's Helen Surana, and I am the editorial content lead for BMJX, which is the part of BMJ that brings you events and partnerships, and so we're really excited to present this webinar, which is looking forward to our BMJ Research Forum next month on the 13th and 14th of December. I am delighted to be joined by three of our esteemed advisory panel for this webinar, and we're going to start by talking to Justine Kupersheff from the Health Foundation. So Justine and the Health Foundation have worked with us on the programme for this event, and so later I'll be talking to Elizabeth Robertson from Diabetes UK and Emma Lowe from the Department of Health and Social Care about clinical trials. But I want to start off by asking Justine just a few questions about what the Health Foundation's interests are and why they are so keen to work with us, the BMJ, on the research forum particularly. So Justine, first question to you really. Why are the Health Foundation partnering with us? Why are you excited about this?
Yeah, thanks, Helen. And thanks very much for inviting me to take part. Well, really, it's about the Health Foundation's mission, and that is to build a healthier UK. And we see research as a critical enabler of that mission. Our routes to having impact include us both conducting and funding research and using research to shape policy and act as a catalyst for change. And the BMJ Research Forum offers us a really valuable opportunity to have all the players needed to enable better health together in one place. So, it brings together researchers, policymakers, practitioners, regulators, people with lived experience, etc. All the players that are needed together. And so we see that as a really great opportunity for us to share the evidence that our work has generated, learn from others, learn from other generators of evidence, other researchers, and then also to influence policy and drive impact. And it affords us really as funders the opportunity to learn from others and be up to date with best practice and innovations in the field.
Brilliant, thank you. We're really pleased you're on board, and perhaps you might want to highlight a couple of the sessions that the Health Foundation have arranged as part of the event that look really interesting.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking it'd be tempting to just kind of promo our own sessions, but I thought instead, well, there is one session that the Health Foundation has curated that I think will be really interesting, and if I were coming, I'd have on my agenda to see list, and that's we're bringing together a range of different funders, different funding organisations. Research on Research Institute, Wellcome, Health Foundation, lots of different people to talk about how we could enable more agile and flexible funding to reduce the burden for people applying for funding, and to make funders and the whole process feel less bureaucratic and quicker and more agile. So I think that'll be a really interesting discussion. And then the other session is, I'd have to big up the known unknowns BMJ session, because I've really enjoyed, I think those webinars are great. And in a previous life before the Health Foundation, I worked on developing clinical guidance at NICE for COVID-19 during the pandemic. And the known unknowns sessions, I thought the ambition of those to kind of get the discussion in a more measured, rational space was a really positive ambition and really important. So those are the two I wanted to really kind of highlight.
Brilliant. That's really great. So Justine, thanks so much for joining us. I think I agree with you on the programme highlights, and just to mention that the Health Foundation are also participating in our fun Meet the Funders session as well. So there's lots of opportunities for people involved and interesting in funding as that part of the research ecosystem to meet your team, but also meet lots of other funders from some of those organisations you mentioned.
That's right, yeah.
And the programme is available on the website for everyone to see. But for now, thank you very much, Justine. Thanks for joining us, and we'll carry on with our discussion about clinical trials now.
That's
Thanks.
okay. Thank you. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
All right. So that was Justine and the Health Foundation, and I'm delighted that I'm now joined by Elizabeth Robertson, who's Director of Research at Diabetes UK and a major funder of diabetes research particularly, and Emma Lowe, who's Head of Research Policy for clinical research and growth at the Department of Health and Social Care. So she is right at the heart of UK policy, particularly for research and research funding. And I thought one of the core parts of this complex and difficult ecosystem that almost all of us, from editors to funders to clinicians and patients, all sort of know is a big linchpin of the research system is the clinical trial. So I thought we'd dig a little bit deeper into clinical trials, particularly in the UK at the moment, but hopefully there's stuff people from all over the world can learn, and we can learn from, but particularly looking at the UK environment for clinical trials at the moment. So I guess my first question really to each of you, and we'll start with Elizabeth and then move on to Emma, is can you explain the importance of clinical trials in your line of work and your core working life?
Helen, hi everybody. Delighted to be here. Delighted to be part of what is a fantastic initiative that the BMJ started, bringing us all together, thinking about the wider ecosystem. So yeah, clinical trials is something we as a funder fund, and the idea, those that be not involved, is we really need, before we change any sort of clinical care or clinical therapies, is to make sure that new innovations are safe and effective. So it's about testing them within participants who early on are healthy, and then later in later phases may have the condition that are actually the therapies trying to advance or improve. So the structures is quite complicated, and it can be extremely tricky to design. The standard is that you've two arms. You've got an arm which is the intervention, and then you've got an arm which potentially is a placebo or maybe standard of care. And it can take a long time. It can be quite resource intensive. And particularly given what we've all lived through with COVID, etc., just keeping large-scale clinical trials going in the UK and elsewhere in the world can be incredibly difficult. As a charity, our main aspect and main reason for existing is to improve the lives of people, in particular, in my case, with diabetes. So we're particularly passionate about making sure that people with diabetes have a role in all aspects of clinical trials, and I know that's something we're going to come on and talk about. But I'll just end by saying that I think the UK is amazing and in an amazing position to deliver and to set up and lead on clinical trials. And we've got our fantastic NHS, which I know is under strain. We've got NIHR, which we've got with us, which is a fantastic body to help us coordinate this. All of our funders, including the charity sector, and then our fantastic hospitals and institutes. So the ecosystem within the UK is extraordinary, but there are challenges, and I know we're going to come and talk about those as well.
Yeah, so before we talk too much about the challenges, and we will be trying to keep a sort of positive outlook. Emma, maybe you could explain your role in the clinical trials ecosystem and the role of your department.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Helen, and thank you for running this event and inviting me to be part of it. Very pleased to be here and be part of the discussion. So I, as Helen said, work in Department of Health and Social Care, and we work with the health departments in the devolved administrations and bodies like NHS England and our like the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency and the Health Research Agency, to make sure that we have a well-functioning ecosystem. And so I think in terms of where clinical trials fits into that, and kind of why we're interested in them, it's really about making sure that we've got the evidence that we need to both deliver the health system that we need effectively now, and also thinking about how we make sure that we've got a health system that's sustainable and providing effective patient care into the future. And so some of the type of things that we would be concerned about then are, obviously there are questions about the treatments that you provide and what's the most cost effective and safe way to provide such treatments, but also thinking about what are we going to need in the future in terms of preventative medicine, different models of healthcare that are going to serve our NHS and global healthcare systems well. So yeah, as Elizabeth said, it's quite a complex kind of range of things that we would look at. And clinical trials is one of the types of research that we look at. So we, through the department and with other funders, invest in a lot of different types of evidence generation to answer all sorts of those kinds of questions, to provide the evidence that we need.
Great, thank you. And just for anyone in the audience who might have a burning question, then do please put that into the chat or the Q&A function, and we'll be monitoring that. And if we've got time at the end, we'll take some questions from the audience. But for now, my next question really for maybe Emma, you start with this one, is just to outline that big range of stakeholders that are involved in clinical trials, because as everyone should know by now, the BMJ Research Forum is about bringing together this complex ecosystem. It's not just the researchers and the funders. There's a broad group of stakeholders. So perhaps maybe you could run through some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I have the great pleasure of doing is leading a programme of work across the UK and across all of our various stakeholders to improve the environment for clinical research. So one of the things that was a real positive that came from the pandemic was us really understanding where, just how strong our health research system is in the UK. And when you look at the amount of COVID research that happened internationally, we weren't necessarily kind of top of the numbers in terms of the numbers of studies that took place, but in terms of the actionable evidence that made a difference to outcomes for people around the world, we were absolutely kind of top of the international rankings there, which we can be really proud of. And that's obviously happening in an international context. So there's a huge amount of work that happens globally about making sure that we've got the basic research and we're asking the right research questions. And then in the UK, part of the way that we make sure that we can deliver research and we can answer those questions is by investing along with other government organisations and with other partners like charities to have a standing infrastructure for research. And so you end up with a complex mix of people who rightly have a perspective on this and kind of influence the way that things would work. So, for example, the partnership that we have, I've mentioned a few in terms of the various governments, and we've also got in England the National Institute for Health Research, which we fund through the department, but obviously brings together a lot of people across the ecosystem. Our individual universities, really importantly, our NHS trusts and other parts of the NHS that deliver research, and they again have multiple roles. So NHS organisations sponsor research. They are the people that design research in some cases. They fund their own research in some cases. They are also the organisations that researchers agree with, that they are, from a commercial perspective, contract with to deliver those studies and to make sure that they deliver on what's been agreed and signed off in the protocol in the right ways. You would expect from a patient perspective and a healthcare professional perspective that it's got a lot of regulatory requirements around it to make sure that people are not taking undue risks in participating in clinical research, and that they are going to answer the questions that we would hope, and we need those different regulatory perspectives. And I think one of the things that makes this quite interesting is then we're talking really about healthcare research that happens in a way that is integrated into our healthcare delivery system. And so it's really important that the the healthcare organisations that are delivering that care, that would be changing their care pathways and the ways that they deliver care as a result of that research. And also, obviously, the patients, members of the public and the people that care for patients also have really important perspectives on what questions we should be asking, how that research should happen, how care should or shouldn't change into the future. And then for us, we obviously have a political dynamic to that too, and different things that people want to make changes in terms of the way the system operates, or the importance of research in terms of its potential for the economy. So we have a lot of different perspectives to take into account, but I have to say all of it is definitely with the aim of how do we make sure that we're serving our population well, and providing the evidence that we need, and that is very much a kind of golden thread that runs through all of our stakeholder relationships.
Great, yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. Maybe you could follow up on that perspective of that golden thread. How do you apply that in your work?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely critical, and I think it does go back to what Emma said about answering the right questions, and that really going to make a difference. So, and it is also about, again, what the forum is trying to do, and what we do a lot of, which is bringing people together very early to think about what those questions are, not just people with the ideas, but also, the people that are going to have to be commissioning this work, the people that would be delivering the patient care end, and critically people who are living with these conditions, so that we really understand what those questions are from a clinical setting, if we are going to go into a clinical trial, and make sure that that can be translated in a timely fashion, because when things don't get translated, it tends to be because some of that hasn't happened. Maybe the question is not the right question. Perhaps the right people haven't been involved. The people haven't been recruited in the right way onto these trials, which will make a difference. Or there just isn't the capacity in the system actually to make that change when it comes to, putting the resources in place, putting the systems change in place. So yeah, I would just really strongly emphasize the importance of investing time and effort at the beginning, to really get those priorities right and get those questions right, and the right people consulted very early on.
So one of those areas, Elizabeth, you mentioned was recruiting patients and people into clinical trials, and obviously that's a very it's a fairly easy metric, one that we sort of learn about when we first learn about how to read a paper is how many did they recruit, what was the dropout rate, is it a viable number of people. So this is a really sort of basic part of a trial, is that recruitment and retention angle. So do you think we're getting better at that, and if so, how are we improving who gets involved in trials and how we involve them?
I would love to think we are. I think again, going back to COVID, I think that has raised the profile so much of the value of getting involved in research, and being part of it. And I know be part of research is a big part of what the UK is trying to do. So everybody sees research as something that they can get involved in. I think what we need to focus on a lot more, if we're really going to improve the health of this nation and globally, is health inequalities in this space. Because 90% of the people who can get involved in trials have got, unless it's specific trials aimed at a specific condition, late stage, have the time and the resources to do so. So we need to make sure that all of our trusts are actively involved in research and are actively improving their care and their practice, because the burden growing, we're an aging population, we've got people living with multiple long-term conditions, not living well. If we're going to change that, as Emma said, we have to think more about the preventative space. We have to think more agilely about how we implement clinical trials within a very complex and busy system, but it has to be seen much more as critical to our healthcare system that we do this, if we are going to really benefit from, as I started, the amazing infrastructure, people, systems, data, all of that we have in place in the UK. But we have to have really innovative, thoughtful, realistic research at its heart if we're going to really improve as a nation, I think. And we lead globally, but we could do so much more if we really use all of our assets and resources together. and really make sure the clinical trials that we invest in, lead on, get translated as quickly as possible.
Yeah, so I'm thinking of, like, in my editing role, like, so often we have a requirement that there is a were patients or the public involved in any part of this research, and it's now a requirement that that question is answered. It's not necessary. It's not yet a requirement that is answered in a sort of positive and constructive way, and all too often the answer is patients were not involved in the design of this research, and usually with a comment like it wasn't appropriate. And that's something that we at BMJ are really trying to look at ways of changing, and in our role as editors and publishers of research, how we can change it. But I wonder, maybe Emma and maybe Elizabeth as well, you could talk a little bit about those co-designing something like a clinical trial with patients involved. How is that happening, and what are the ways that people who might not consider it to be easy or useful can really see examples of how it is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the publishers, it's great to hear that you do that, Helen. We have taken in NIHR a similar line in terms of expectation that anything that is funded by the NIHR does have effective patient and public involvement included in its development. I think there's a long way to go on co-design. I know Elizabeth's got more experience with that than I do, so I'll let Elizabeth speak to co-design. But I think in terms of patient engagement in the design and beyond, I think that maybe researchers who have done this well, and this is incumbent on us as well as the department and as a funder to do, is really to set out why the research outcomes, and they demonstrably are better if you have included people that might be involved in the research, or people who know their issues and have their interests. That they would be able to contribute as well, because it is sometimes difficult to include the specific patient group that you might wish to attract or to get their involvement in the design. But I think there's something quite fundamental about, if you are going to ask people to take part in a research study, that knowing whether it is something that they're going to want to do, that it's being explained in a way that to them, that they are actually going to be retained in that study, as you say. If that's the biggest challenge around making sure that we've got research that fulfills its outcomes, that has enough people to be actionable evidence at the end of it, then actually it seems a bit disrespectful not to ask them what they might need in advance of that happening. Now, that's actually quite a baseline level, and I think that that we can go much further on things like co-design and co-management of studies as well. And there are some really good examples of that happening. And fundamentally, if this is to improve the outcomes for the people affected by a particular condition or a disease, or who might be living with it in the future, they are the people that we most need to know that it's going to work for.
Yeah, thank you. Elizabeth.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And we refer to experts by experience, because people who, especially living with longer term conditions, are absolute experts and can really help in that co-design. Like you, we expect and insist upon people being involved right from the outset, priority setting, designing the projects, sitting on steering groups, helping to disseminate, and being part of that sort of life cycle of research, not just being brought in to tick a box and to make sure that they're making they're present, because it can be quite tokenistic, and we're trying really hard to move away from that, making sure that everybody that we are talking to is representative as much as we can, reaching those communities which are underserved, and also making sure their voices are heard in perhaps not traditional ways. We often think of this type of a forum, being in quite daunting settings, sometimes bringing people in and expecting them to contribute. So it's more about, I think, going out to people where they're based and actually thinking how can they contribute in different ways if they haven't got a lot of time or resources, but have got really, really valuable insights into how a trial could be designed, as you said, Emma, to make it feasible. Because what we often see is that trials can't recruit for reasons which are quite basic logistics, trying to get to hospitals, trying to, give the amount of time. So how, so as you said, Emma, as well, doing this can really, make them much more efficient, effective, and ultimately, lead to that benefit to a wide and representative group of people, which we all want.
Brilliant. Yeah, and it's worth saying, Elizabeth, that you're going to be participating on a panel which will be chaired by Emma Doble, who's a BMJ patient editor, who is a person who lives with type 1 diabetes herself. So we are hoping that it's not, whilst it not too an intimidating environment for her, in fact, very much home turf, but can really bring that strong perspective of what it is like. And what she and people that she talks to every day need from research. So really looking forward to that session at the event. The next thing we were going to discuss really was just focusing a bit more on that sort of what makes a successful trial, and a little bit more about that translation element, which is another thing we're going to be digging into at the research forum. But why is it so important that we consider the end? It seems like an obvious question. Why is it so important that we just talk about how treatments get delivered in the NHS or whatever setting that patients find themselves in? Emma, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So ultimately, the outcome, it's important to say that we don't know that what is being assessed in a trial is going to be successful in a traditional sense of, it's going to be proven that it works. And the fact that you find out things don't work is equally important. And if something is proven to work, understanding that it works in the context in which you would be delivering care, and that the people who will be involved in rolling out that care already understanding what that change is, really helps bridge that translational gap. And to have a sense that actually this is not something that works kind of in an isolated situation where everything is kept perfect. It actually works in the setting that you'd be putting it into practice. And I think while the COVID experience was obviously an extreme situation, and when there are literally no treatments and you are in a global crisis, it did make a lot of things happen that didn't otherwise happen. So we shouldn't ignore the fact that was the context. But one of the reasons why the recovery trial was so successful is because it both, in the way that it was designed, it paid attention to the realities of people who were operating in that hospital environment, the practicalities that they would be facing on a day-to-day basis, whether they had access to test results, what they would know about the patients, the processes that they would and wouldn't be able to go through. And then equally, the healthcare system was responsive at massive scale in having the research happening in their hospitals. And where it was most successful, it was part of the triage process as people were brought into hospital, of saying, actually, this person, has been diagnosed in a certain way. Which of the trials that we have are they eligible for? And that was considered the standard of care. Now, there won't always be that option, but where trials are really successful and help to bridge that gap is where both the needs of the people that are delivering it and the healthcare system both kind of make space for the research to happen and make it part of the normal job.
Yeah. Elizabeth, have you got anything to add on that? I was wondering actually about asking about the translation happening sort of right at the start of disease processes as well, that sort of bringing basic science, translating that through to something that looks like a clinical trial, and then application is probably something that happens a bit more in your field as well.
Yeah, and I think often we just need to be a bit more joined up in that long-term thinking about, getting basic scientists and clinicians, healthcare professionals who are not particularly research active, again, working together to think about how this can be translated. Sometimes you see, really what feels like really promising work not moving forward because there isn't anybody who particularly is lined up to do the translational piece, and it can be expensive and it can be logistically very tricky to get these things off the ground. So I think the more we sort of work together to have line of sight to innovations coming in the various spaces, and obviously I know most about the world of diabetes, but for example, we have immunotherapies within the type 1 diabetes space, which are just about to get approval, we hope, within the UK, but we need to be ready to deliver that and change our clinical care practice, if that is going to be the case. So it's complex space that needs a lot of people to own, not just the research community. And people feel that ownership very early on. So again, it isn't something that's seen as innovation, which is disrupting what they're trying to do in their clinical care, but they can actually see the promise that will actually improve the lives of the people that we're trying to serve, but also making their very hard-won resources work for them, so that they're not trying to firefight. They actually feel they're part of the innovation and part of making the system better.
That's great, and that's definitely something we're hoping to be really digging into at the event as well, with keynotes from LifeArc, which are a translation specialist funder, and also lots of policy discussions as well. Just to pick up on the innovation theme, and to talk specifically about that, what's challenging the traditional clinical trial, like how are they changing? Like, Emma, I think you can start off on this maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a real global trend to think about delivery of trials closer to the participant. And so actually speaking to many of the things that we've been picking up on here, and what creates barriers for people to participate. So where possible, can studies be delivered in a home, delivered in community settings, and I'm quite excited about kind of research sites.
Emma, I'm just going to stop you because your internet seems to be a bit unsteady at the moment. So perhaps if we can get Elizabeth to follow on a little bit on that.
I think Emma was talking about sort of the decentralizing clinical trials, making them close, because she obviously works a lot in that area. Hopefully we'll get Emma back. I think again it comes back to making clinical trials applicable to the real world, and really thinking about that from the outset. The other, I think, really great innovations that are happening in clinical trials is thinking about more adaptive trials. So again, they can take many, many years and build up with thousands of people, but are we adapting it and thinking much more about personalization and precision medicine in this space? I think that's definitely the future. And also thinking about combinations. So we often think about drugs, but also there are technology innovations. There are innovations which are to do with psychology, to do with data. So how do we sort of pull all of this together and really think about, again, even more complex, but really, really, really potentially effective outcomes for people? And again, putting the person at the heart of these, and thinking about how are we, really, with all of this investment going into the clinical trial infrastructure in the UK in particular, making sure all of that effort does lead to real innovation, given very, very exciting breakthroughs that are coming into us all the time. But the worst thing that can happen is that these are interesting but never get translated, because the actual trial design is too traditional and not close enough to that potential translation within the real environment.
Yeah, and just while we hopefully get Emma back, but we'll see. The idea of, one of the things we're going to talk a lot about, because one of the keynote speakers is Cathy Sudlow from Health Data Research UK, is that use of data. And I guess there's something about the speed at which technology and devices and wearables are meaning that in some ways that how you collect data for clinical trials is changing dramatically.
Yeah, and I think there is so much data out there already. I mean, I love the work, the studies that actually try to integrate data now and think about, what is it we already know? How do we integrate it and really understand it better? So let's not just try another trial. Let's actually understand the information we already have. But yes, Health Data Research UK and all of the potential, again, we have with our ability to collect really, really good quality data in the UK. I mean, again, it is absolutely phenomenal, the data that we have in the UK. In diabetes alone, we have an audit which goes back over 10 years now and is the largest audit of clinical outcomes in the world in this space. But yet, how do we use it better? How do we integrate it more? And how do we listen to people who ultimately give us the data that, are experts by experienced patients, to understand their perspective on this? But yes, it needs to be a much more integrated part of the clinical trial infrastructure, and sharing of data, of course, being absolutely key.
Yeah. Welcome back, Emma. Just to follow on quickly, because we're running up against the clock a little bit. I was going to ask you both for examples of collaborations. Obviously, the Research Forum, it's all about bringing this ecosystem together. And Emma, I think you had a good example of something that you're leading. You're on mute at the moment, so just to bring you in to answer that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned it a little bit earlier, which is the partnership that we have developed in support of implementing the UK's vision for the future of clinical research delivery, which is focused on exactly these issues. And we bring together a really wide range of perspectives. So we have patient and public contributors, people who work in the system in the NHS, representing particular professional groups. We also have obviously researchers, various types of funders, and different funders bring lots of perspective as well as all of the kind of publicly funded organisations. And I think having that kind of the opportunity to have those conversations about actually what is it that we need to do, and set out a vision of actually, if you were describing where would we want to be in 10 years time, what will research delivery look like, has really helped kind of push everybody forward and take that collective view. And actually there's a lot of agreement about what it might look like, exactly how we get there. Lots of different perspectives, but that's what will make sure that we end up with a great system in the future.
Brilliant. And Elizabeth, any big collaborations that you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I mean, we collaborate a lot actually with the NIHR increasingly, and yeah, I would really encourage that. I mean, you can do so much more when you work in partnership, but we as a charity tend to always think about partnership first, whether it's setting priorities or funding or thinking about inspiring others to do more in the healthcare space. So yeah, and one collaboration I did want to talk about was we have a consortium which we've been funding for over 10 years now, which was all about trying to recruit onto clinical trials and immunotherapy in type 1 in particular, which has been really successful. And that's for a number of reasons, but it's largely leadership of the people involved, the spirit and mindset, wanting to collaborate, so bringing together experts across the country, involving people who are going to benefit from these trials at the outset, and then also level playing field with all the healthcare professionals that have to be involved in this within the very, very busy clinical settings where they're recruiting trials. But we went from no trials to all trials starting to be looking to the UK as a good place to do these. So it's I think it's a good example of how a consortium approach in this space can really work well and benefit everybody.
Great, thanks. It's so interesting, and I do feel it's one of those areas where I'd love to learn more, and we have just scratched the surface of so many aspects of just the clinical trial, really, that we're going to be digging in more deeply at the event. I did ask you to prepare in advance perhaps 1 or 2 sessions that you thought you were particularly looking forward to at the Research Forum in December. Emma, do you want to go first?
Well, I'm going to be cheeky and plug the session that I'm involved in. So it's going to be led by the Association of Medical Research Charities, and it's exploring kind of who gets a say in setting the questions, and how do we really make sure that the public voice and the patient voice is well represented. And I think we'll be having a really robust and interesting conversation about how we do that well. Brilliant, thank you. Elizabeth.
Thanks, Helen. Yes, I'm going to be rather cheeky and also promote the session that I'm lucky enough to join the panel of. Again, it's looking at this aspect really from a diabetes perspective, and I'm really excited because we're going to be joined by 2 amazing speakers, Professor Partha Carr, who's the National Diabetes Speciality Lead, and also Dr. Shivani Misra, who is a Wellcome Fellow at Imperial. And they're both not only fabulous people, but they're also really engaging, and it's going to be a really lively session, which I'm really looking forward to.
Yes, I can guarantee there'll be some liveliness, because although we've had a very nice discussion today, for which I thank you both for your politeness and calmness and everything else, there are some real issues in this that need actual debate and conversations, and we really hope that the forum's going to be a place for that. I don't think we're going to have time for any questions today, so I'd just like to thank everyone online for joining us. If you do have questions, please, you'll be getting a survey afterwards there, and there'll be an opportunity to put in any comments or questions you've got there. So please do answer that. Most importantly, we hope that you will be able to join us in December. And even if you don't, please do give us some suggestions for what you'd like to see in future research forums, whether you'd like to see more webinars like this, what topics and all that sort of stuff. If you've participated today, there's a discount code, which you can see. So please do use that and share it with your friends before the seats run out. And mainly, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Emma, and thank you, Justine, from before. But thank you very much for your time today. And I hope everyone has found our conversation interesting, and look forward to seeing you in December. Thanks very much.